All right, all right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our final Black History Month Speaker Series program. I am your mayor, Barbara Foushee, and I am really excited for the dynamic duo that we have to present to us this evening, and we hope that you will leave this space armed with more knowledge about Black people and their continuing contributions to our society. Again, I do want to shout out and thank our Parks and Recreation Department. Let me see some hands. Where they at? Parks and Rec people. And other town staff for organizing and executing this program so seamlessly, and also many other events throughout the year. They are our programming folks. So before we get to these speakers, I just want to know, who saw the Super Bowl halftime show last night? Who liked it and thought it was timely and more than appropriate? Yeah, so I know that people, have varying opinions about Kendrick Lamar and what he meant and just various interpretations, but it resonated with me because he used his platform on a world stage to get his message across to all. He used it to elevate current events in real time, and he told some hard truths, like calling out the streak of anti-Blackness that has pervaded and continues to pervade this country's past as well as present. And you're doing something when you, I do it, I try to do it. When you have a big platform like that and you use it for the good of people. He is not just a hip hop artist, he is an educator, he is a poet, he is a deep thinker. And my heart has been full all day. He gave us phrases like the revolution is about to be televised. And he also protested racism through defiance. Kendrick Lamar understands that American culture is Black culture, and Black culture is hip hop culture. And he's also not afraid. It really is about laying it all out on the field in the hopes of educating people and in the hopes for a better tomorrow. He's a prophet of America's messy reality. And he made it clear that he would not soften his contempt or his approach for the mass audience. I myself have been struggling, quite a bit. When I think about some of the things that have been happening, I feel vulnerable. I feel hurt. I feel left out. And it almost feels like we've not made any progress. One thing that I do know, and one thing that I feel would be helpful is for us to organize. Organizing is always a great way to get messaging across about things that matter to all of us. We're all impacted, whether we know it or not. Something happening to me is happening to you. Something happens to Councilmember Palmer is happening to me. So, there's just really no way around it. But back to Kendrick Lamar, he's authentic, he's a truth teller. And I think that's what we've always needed, and we continue to need it today. We cannot sit in silence while all of this stuff is going on. We've got to open our mouths and move our feet. Amen. Use whatever platform you have to elevate messages of hope, because I feel like that's what we all need right now. So I just think about where silence has gotten us, right? Absolutely nowhere, to be honest. And so those are my comments. They're mine. I stand behind him. Could even be challenged about him. I don't know. But I'm not just the mayor, I'm a human being. I'm an African American woman in this country. And that's my reality, which may be different from some of yours. And so I'm being a little vulnerable tonight, but I'm still your mayor. I am still your mayor. So next, I am just honored to introduce our first speaker for the evening, Dr. Michelle Laws. She's a dynamic leader, right? And I have to get in a character for Dr. Laws because she's all that in a bag of chips. So Dr. Laws is a dynamic leader, speaker, and advocate for social justice, human rights, and mental health. I was just with her on Saturday at the North Carolina Legislative Breakfast on Mental Health. We see each other there pretty much every year. She is a Chapel Hill native. She holds a PhD in social and behavioral sciences from Virginia Commonwealth University and MA in sociology from North Carolina Central University and a BA in communications from UNC Chapel Hill. Her husband is coming in with their little one, Nova. They're coming in the back and being seated. Professionally, Dr. Laws is the CEO of Symbiotic Strategies, a public relations firm focused on improving healthcare relationships with marginalized communities. She has held leadership roles with the North Carolina Medical Society, the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, and the North Carolina National Alliance on Mental Illness, among others. She played a pivotal role in North Carolina's COVID-19 response, advocating for historically marginalized populations. Inspired by trailblazing Black women, she ran in the 2018 Democratic primary for North Carolina's 4th Congressional District, making history as the first Black woman and Chapel Hill High School graduate to do so. And I'm going to go ahead and applaud her for stepping out on faith, because that's what it was. She is guided by principles of service. She believes in lifting the marginalized and echoes the teachings of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Jesus Christ. Recognized with numerous awards, she sees leadership as a commitment to advocacy rather than personal accolades. Dr. Laws lives in Durham County, North Carolina, with her husband, Carl, and their god-granddaughter, Miss Nova. Raise your hand, Nova. Nova in the house. And so without further ado, I give you Dr. Michelle Laws.
Thank you so much. First, let me just say, let's give another round of applause for our mayor here, and I call her mine. A trailblazer and a history maker herself, who is indeed a servant leader. So I was extremely honored when I got the request from her to participate in the town's Black History seminars. And, you know, we often see each other out there together on what I call the battlefield for justice. But in her role as mayor, she could have chosen anyone. I realize that. As a steward and a gatekeeper of information that is shared with the people in which she has been elected to serve, she could have chosen anyone. And so I am forever grateful for this invitation. I love being here. Actually, the lines are blurred as a Chapel Hill native. Many of us know that. And particularly from the African American community, your grandma might have lived over here and your auntie over here, and everybody's just family. And so it is really an honor to be here with you all, members of town of Carrboro and Chapel Hill and beyond. I have some friends, a particular friend that I labored with in the Department of Health and Human Services Division of Mental Health, Dee and Substance Abuse Services. Art, it's so great to see you here. And of course, y'all know I love Mama Clark, and she and I had some words on the way up here because we said, Lord, we got to get this relationship right, because she's She said, I told Laura, I got to go see Michelle. I got to go hear Michelle. And, you know, my grandmother's gone. My great-grandmother's gone. My great-aunt, they are gone on and are now resting among the ancestors. My dad. Many people that I love who encouraged me, who made up the wind beneath my wings are resting among the ancestors. And so it is so good when I see the elders that are still here who love on me, who encourage me, who will stand behind me no matter what. And I consider that you, Ms. Clark, thank you so much for your love and your support throughout the years. And of course, my husband's already been recognized, and all of that stuff has already been covered, but just in case you need to reach me following this discussion tonight, you can email me or call, and we can keep the conversation going. I do know that what we do in these next 4 challenging years, in order for us to end up on the other side in a better place, it's going to require community coming together. And so all of us have a stake in this democratic republic. And so it's important to have conversations like this. So I will not, I can talk, I'm a talker, and so I can go on and on. But I was asked to specifically talk about the role of African Americans in labor, in terms of the contributions of African Americans. And what I have done is fashioned my talk tonight based on what I think is important for us to consider, and that is the unpraised and underpaid legacy of African Americans in building America. Before the Mayflower, and even way before the Mayflower, to the present, there's a book, if you have not read it, that it's older now, and there's been more things added out there that are noteworthy in terms of the history of African Americans or African slaves and their descendants on these shores we call America. Lerone Bennett's book, Before the Mayflower, was introduced to me when I was at Carolina. I am one of the students who happened to have been blessed to have the late Dr. Sonia Haynes Stone. I had her in Afro and African American studies. And once I got over my girl crushing every time I would be in class with her, some of the knowledge that she would drop. So I do recommend the 1619 project is great that Nicole has done, that there are others that predate that are just as timely. And one is titled Before the Mayflower. But before the Mayflower, and through 1619 to the present, Black Americans across the diaspora blacks across the diaspora, descendants of African slaves, have played a pivotal role in building the economy of America. From nearly 300 years of free labor during that period we know as slavery in America, 246 years to be exact, through their inhumane exploited labor during the Reconstruction and Jim Crow era, to the often oppressive labor throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, blacks have made significant contributions to the building of America's economy across all sectors. These contributions have often gone unpraised and underpaid. We know that in terms of slavery, which happened, the time period that anchors that is 1619, some say earlier, 1619 to 1865 with the Emancipation Proclamation, and also through Reconstruction, the Reconstruction era, which began in 1861. When the Union captured territory in the Confederacy. Others say that it began a little later in terms of Reconstruction when President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, and then it was ratified in 1865. Most people say that was the jump off for the Reconstruction era. And during the Reconstruction Reconstruction era, we know that the Freedmen's Bureau was established to help formerly enslaved people with food, housing, and legal assistance. The 15th Amendment was ratified in 1870, granting all males the right to vote. During the Reconstruction Act of 1867 began what is referred to as the Radical Reconstruction, which gave Black people more political power. So during this time, we saw Blacks elected into state legislatures as well as Congress. So during Reconstruction, there was still a period of progress, even though evidence suggests that it was also a time in which Black people were underpaid for their labor, and there were many exploitive practices that were taking place that prevented African descendants of African slaves, African American descendants of African slaves, from accumulating the same type of wealth that their white counterparts were accumulating during this period of expansion and progress. And then in 1875, the Republicans passed a law prohibiting segregation in public spaces, but the Supreme Court overturned it in 1883. So it is important for us to know that all the rights that many of my ancestors, many of the ancestors of the people here today fought for, nothing is guaranteed. Then we moved into the Jim Crow era, where we saw the Compromise of 1877, which ended the Reconstruction era and led to the establishment of Jim Crow laws. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 overturned later the Jim Crow laws. However, Jim Crow during that period represented a formal, codified system of racial apartheid that dominated the American South for 3/4 of a century. 3/4 of a century. When we think about African Americans and the contribution starting with slavery, I often say that slavery was America's first big business enterprise. It was America's first big business enterprise. Laborers were not free, right? Operating a plantation, and let me just say, laborers weren't free. Operating a plantation was costly. It was a costly business that only a few could afford. So the owners of the laborers came, buying slaves came at a hefty price for some. However, the labor was free. The laborers were not free, but the laborers were free. Slaves were chattel property, unpaid, and the profits that the slave owners accumulated did not include deduction of wages. So they didn't account for the wages because there were no wages. And then the profits made from multiple sources throughout this period in America as well as the UK, which ended slavery 30 years or more before America did, but they refer to it as triangular profits made through different sources and sectors. Some of those sources and sectors was insurance, building industry, so the construction industry, insurance industry were the two largest ones. I put up here just a snapshot of a news clip article ad that was not uncommon during this particular period. Negroes for sale. Jacob August says, I will sell by public auction on Tuesday of next court, being the 29th of November, 8 valuable family servants consisting of one Negro man, a first-rate field hand, a boy, 17 years old of age, a trusty house servant, and one excellent cook, and a housemaid, and one seamstress. The balance are under 12 years of age, so the children that came with them, and they are sold for no fault. So these were some of the faults. They're not slothful, they're not lazy, they're not cunning, conniving, and manipulative. That's how slaves were described and punished. So no fault. These are good slaves. No fault. Also, a quality of household and kitchen furniture, a stable lot, terms accommodating and will be known on the day of the sale. So we know that during slavery, one, the labor, it was expensive to own slaves, so not every white person owned slaves. And the labor was free for almost 300 years. And then there were profits that were made in multiple industries. So not just agribusiness, not just agriculture, but insurance and the building or construction industry as well. There is a saying that I read in an article that people put too much into the investment of slavery in terms of the American economy. So I want to talk about the labor and the contributions to the American economy. Before I go there, though, I want to stay here for 1 second. My slides are not synchronized with my notes. The enslavers relied on enslaved blacks. I want to talk a little bit about in North Carolina. So we know that the South practiced some of the most inhumane forms of slavery. When we think about Brunswick Town, a port of entry for enslaved people was founded in 1726 along Cape Fear, along a Blackwater River that runs from the interior of the state to the Atlantic Ocean and served as key transportation route during the colonial period. People often talk about South Carolina, but I wanted to focus a little bit on North Carolina as well. White enslavers who relocated from South Carolina came into North Carolina, wanted to implement the same agricultural practices that they had seen in the Low Country. They began forcing enslaved people along the Cape Fear region to grow rice and indigo. Enslavers relied on enslaved black workers to develop North Carolina's economic infrastructure. So we're not just talking about the contributions of black labor, of African and their descendants' labor to the national economy, but also throughout the South. North Carolina is no exception. Enslaved Africans built canals that connected the state's interior Piedmont region to coastal ports, underpinning the state's economic development. They also built canals to drain swamps, cultivated rice, and clear access to waterways for the lumber industry. And all throughout eastern North Carolina, they contributed to the mass production of cotton. So how many of you drive down eastern North Carolina and you still see cotton growing along eastern North Carolina, right? So I stopped one year and got some. And then one year, this man, it was my first stint with DHHS. So in the early 2000s, I had mentioned to this white gentleman who was on the mental health board at that time, I sure would love me some cotton. The next meeting, he told me to come with him to his truck. And this man had brought all this cotton from his farm for me to have. He had it in bags. And I'm like, I meant I didn't mean like, what you think I'm going to do with this cotton is what I wanted to say. A good resource, if you want to know about the contributions of slaves to the North Carolina economy, I recommend David Selsky's work, The Watermen's Song, Slavery and Freedom in Maritime North Carolina. New Bern, let's shift there, was founded in 1710 along the Pamlico River by Swiss and German settlers who enslaved black people. And it became North Carolina's largest port city in the late 18th century. By 1724, enslaved blacks made up at least 24% of the New Bern population. You can learn more about the contributions of blacks, of African slaves, in Marissa Kinsey's work, which was her master's thesis. I'm hoping eventually it'll be turned into a book because it is really good. Beyond the Veil, Visualizing Slavery in Craven County. And then we have the works of Tara Hunter, who wrote To Joy, My Freedom, Southern Black Women Lives and Laborers After the Civil War, chronicling the work that the contributions that African American women made through their labor to the economy of America, and including down in the South. Slavery, again, was America's first big business, not the railroads, but slavery. Slavery was a business. Profits during slavery were primarily made by plantation owners who forced enslaved people to labor on large-scale agricultural production of crops like cotton, tobacco, and sugar, which were then sold at high prices in the global market, generating significant wealth for slave owners. Essentially, the enslaved people's labor was the primary source of profit, with the system further benefiting those involved in the slave trade, merchants selling goods to plantations, and even northern industry. So I tell my cousins who up in New Jersey and New York and stuff, when they always want to talk about the South, you may not have participated in the same way and in the same degree, and actually they all from here, because my aunt and them migrated there, but even northern industries that rely on slave-grown cotton for their textile production. Key points about the profits of Africans and their descendants during slavery, during Reconstruction, during Jim Crow, and post that era all the way up to the present. One, slavery specifically was labor intensive. Plantation owners focused on crops that required a large workforce to cultivate and harvest, making slave labor highly profitable. And I mentioned the triangular profits. The slave trade itself was lucrative. The merchants that were buying enslaved people at low prices and then selling them in America for a significant profit. Domestic slave trade within the United States, the northern involvement, using monies from the slave trade to build and bring online industries that many of us take for granted today, such as insurance companies, the railroad business, banks, and other businesses that fuel the economy. The African Americans and African slaves and their descendants have been key in building and moving the GDP in America as the newest country, younger than Great Britain or the UK, helping us to catapult us to the top, and we have never lost our footing. We are still one of the strongest GDP, but you cannot, absolutely you cannot dismiss the contributions throughout our history of African Americans and Africans through slavery, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and all the way through. And so, when we look at the time period, when you look at the timeline here, I want to zero in on something. Someone said that the historical record of the post-war economy demonstrated that slavery was neither a central driving force of or economically necessary for American economic dominance. And I say, and that was in a conservative think tank's RAG, as they would call it, the Foundation of Economic Education, published an article by Corey Locano, who said that no, slavery did not make America rich, and went on to make that claim. Well, as my grandma would say, the devil is a lie. And so if we think about the period following when Great Britain or the United United Kingdom ended chattel slavery. So the labor, the contributions of the slaves, and also, don't forget, America was a much younger country, right? And so it is important for us to understand the contributions that labor made to the economy of this great nation. Great Britain abolished slavery in most of its colonies in 1834. So we began to see the closing of that gap in terms of the GDP. So in 1834, when the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833 took effect, the United States abolished slavery about 30 years later. And on December 6, 1865, when the 13th Amendment to the Constitution was ratified, the 13th Amendment outlawed slavery and involuntary servitude except as what? 13th Amendment? Except, exactly right, as punishment for a crime. So we also, if I want to shift a bit and think about the prison industrial complex, we are still extrapolating free labor almost when we think about who is most likely to be caught up in the criminal justice system, black and brown bodies. So for about 246 years overall and about 31 years longer than the United Kingdom, slavery was the main economic driver for the U.S.'s economy. So what do you say about labor in America? Often underpaid, if paid at all, and unpraised. Companies and organizations that directly or indirectly benefited from slave labor and labor during the Reconstruction era and Jim Crow. The United States used slaves to build the White House and most of the federal buildings that are in Washington, D.C. today. They didn't get paid. Canal improvements, inaugural activities. They not only were they the builders, but they specifically, black bodies I'm talking about. Now, I'm not discrediting the contributions of other immigrants to this country, but for over 246 years and even longer in some areas, we are talking about black bodies. Black bodies. They were the servants. They were the street keepers. They were the public service workers in Washington, D.C. and in many municipalities across the country, including in Chapel Hill. Blacks returning from most military battles and enlistment duties did not get the same level of compensation for their services, including limited access to the GI Bills, housing subsidies, and even medical care. It's important, if you haven't read, and so health equity is my jam, my thing, as they say. But I would recommend to you Medical Apartheid to get you started, and then Legacy, of course. But medical apartheid. Business associated in some way with the railroads, with slavery included in large part the railroads, CSX Corp, Norfolk Southern, the Mobile and Girard, now part of Norfolk Southern, all used slaves. Central of Georgia at that time was also a part of Norfolk Southern, all used and owned slaves. Union Pacific, Canadian National, go into our media, Knight Rider, the Tribune, Media General, Advanced Publications, E.W. Scripps, and Gannett, parent and publisher company of USA Today, parent company, all used profits from slaves. Consumer goods, the Brooks Brothers made clothes for slaves and profited in that way, sent them south. How kind of them. And then Tiffany's, which we love, founded with cotton mill profits from slaves working in cotton, established Tiffany's, and they continued to profit by mining in Africa. Still use slaves. Banks and financial institutions, Brown Brothers and Lehman Brothers, all owned slaves. J.P. Morgan accepted slaves as collateral and owned slaves. Chase Manhattan Bank, Riggs Bank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo purchased by them, owned or accepted slaves as collateral. Fleet Boston Financial Court, Aetna, based in Hartford, Connecticut, insured slaves and has also helped African Americans Americans through recognizing as part of their role or their founder's role has done pittance, so to speak, or some forms of not reparations but support. New York Life insured slaves. AIG bought American General Financial, which owns U.S. Life Company. You also insured slaves. Educational institutions benefited from slave labor and also Reconstruction labor during Reconstruction era, as well as Jim Crow. Harvard Law School endowed with money from a slave owner from Isaac Royal. Harvard University recruited and raised money from slave-owning families. Yale University recruited and raised money from slave-owning families. Penn recruited and raised money from slave-owning families. Columbia University recruited and raised money from slave-owning families. Rutgers, Brown, Dartmouth, University of Delaware, Princeton University, University of Virginia, and UNC Chapel Hill. We cannot leave us out. How dare I? That would not be right. This is taken from the archives at the university. This is Wilson Caldwell, who is identified as a college servant. So throughout this university, we had people working as servants all throughout the university. We also know the history of the brick masons who helped lay the buildings and so forth and so on. So I did not want UNC to feel bad. So let me just say, as I get ready to move into current day, but I want to say a word about resistance. It is so important. I say that slave rebellions actually perhaps could be identified as the first labor movements and unionizing. Right? That's how I like to see them, as the first labor movements and unions. So people weren't just sitting and allowing themselves to be exploited, sold, beaten, treated inhumanely and so forth without resistance and without rebellion. And these are just a list of some of the rebellions, the more maybe lesser known to some of you, rebellions. I want to talk about one that I had no idea, and that was a rebellion in 1842, a slave revolt in Cherokee Nation. And that slave revolt, and the history of that, and there's different people who have done the research and published on it, not a whole lot, but it blew my mind. I had no idea. It was researching for this presentation that I found out that there was a brutal slave revolt on the Cherokee Nation, who wanted to hold on to the slaves that they had acquired. Then go figure, here I was thinking, we worked together. We were like, and everything with the Cherokees. Well, the Cherokees owned slaves in the nation, and there was one of the most brutal slave rebellions and revolts as a result of slaves in the Cherokee Nation attempting to be free. I did skip over Carrboro. Now, I put UNC in there. We cannot forget Mr. Julian Shakespeare Carr, who was the textile owner, but also, as we know, also a not kind of black folk, to put it lightly. So the 1842 slave revolt in the Cherokee Nation was the largest escape of a group of slaves to occur in the Cherokee Nation. It was then known as Indian Territory. The slave revolt started on November the 15th, 1842, when a group of about 20 African slaves who were enslaved by the Cherokee escaped and tried to reach Mexico, where slavery had been abolished in 1829. And along their way south, they were joined by 15 other slaves who had escaped from the Creek Nation in Indian Territory. The fugitives, it is recorded, were met with 2 slave catchers taking a family of 8 slave captives back to Choctaw Nation. The fugitives killed the hunters and allowed the family to join their party. Along the way, an Indian party came and captured them and killed many of the slaves who had revolted. So now, labor, exploitation of blacks. So our labor is all throughout the building of America, the running of American corporations, and the building of cities and the fine institutions, across institutions, our educational institutions, prison industrial complex. I was going down a rabbit hole, not a rabbit hole, but I was getting too enthralled in the prison labor contributions, so the old gang chains and all of that. So think of that also as labor, as a way that blacks have contributed to the economy. So rebellion has been the way. It has not been just to sit by and to allow ourselves to be exploited. I want to highlight a few of the pioneers in the labor movement. Hattie Canty is recognized as one of the greatest strike leaders, organized one of the largest groups of hospitality workers in Nevada. We've got Asa Philip Randolph, organized the Pullman Porters and was a key architect of the March on Washington for Freedom and Jobs. And in fact, my great-grandmother, Annie Cotton, her brother Walter, and Aunt Lil, they lived in New York. He was a Pullman Porter. He was a cook, actually, first. And so I'm very proud of that. Belma Hopkins mobilized 10,000 workers to unionize right here in North Carolina, the R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company in Winston-Salem, and then we know Bayard Rustin. I just identify him as the guts and the brains around the whole lifestyle. All right, so as I come to bring this down, and there are others, Septima Clark and many others. So what does nearly 300 years of free labor, followed by about 12 years of short-lived economic gains and opportunities that occurred during the Reconstruction era, followed by about 88 years of exploitation and dehumanizing treatment as laborers during the Jim Crow era. What did that result in? It resulted in putting what some refer to as tantamount to putting bricks around the ankles of African Americans and the generations following of that current era and the generations that followed in terms of their ability to accumulate wealth, build wealth on their own, and to experience the same privileges that many whites experience as a result of being on the other side, as a result of being the descendants of former slave owners, former shopkeepers who benefited from slaves, even if they didn't own slaves. So when people say, but I didn't own slaves, I say, well, just go back through your history. Okay, I mean, you're sitting in this $1 million home right now, and you ain't had a job in about 10 years, so, but I had an inheritance. Okay, so let's follow that money, right? It didn't just drop out of the sky. So I'm peeling where all this wealth came from. It didn't just drop out of the sky, right? So people have said it is tantamount to having these bricks on and weights on the ankles of African Americans in terms of their opportunities, even though to accumulate wealth, and in particularly what's more important is generational wealth. I don't need you to raise your hand, but if you were able to help your child once they were adults buy their first home, make a significant contribution or down payment to their first home, were you able to send your grandchildren or children to school based on inheritance? Were you able to make sure that once they got out of school, they had the right connections and jobs and so forth? So that's what we talk about. We're not talking about, when we talk about the privilege of those who are white in America, and specifically those who are in some way have a legacy or are descendants of former slave owners. So the current day is not because black folk are shiftless and don't want to work, because I hope we've proven to America by now we work. 300 years almost, free labor. 88 years of working for nothing, going during the Jim Crow period, post-Jim Crow, in the 30s, the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and 50s, and 60s, right? For low wages, pennies on the dollar, and still getting up and going to the houses, still getting up and going to the institutions. I hope we prove by now we're not just by nature shiftless and lazy creatures, but we are very productive. So what has that gotten us? So there's about a 24-cent difference in the income between blacks in general and whites. So for every dollar that whites in general make, blacks make 76 cents to the dollar. And if you go down and look at the gender disparities, black women make about 63 cents. And so there's still a lot of ground to cover. There's a persistent income inequality. When we think about the persistent and growing wealth gap, that $27,100 to $250,000 to $400,000, what do you think that is? That is the real wealth gap between black families and white families. That is the real wealth gap. Pull it up through, Pew has published around this. Harvard Business Review has some articles on it. Just research it. This is the real wealth gap. So people say, what is blacks' contribution to labor? Well, it's helped people. It's helped build gaps, build disparities and disadvantages that it will take a long time to catch up, if ever. What do you, 6.2, disproportionately higher unemployment, that 6.2 is actually, was the recent unemployment rate for blacks. But, row. Here. Let's see. Okay, well, I was going to show you the trends in the unemployment rates. Okay, well, I can talk through it. So, the unemployment rate consistently, there's been a gap, even though it is closing, but it's still been a persistent gap. The highest unemployment rate for African Americans was about 21% back in the 80s. 21% back in the 80s. And then the other slide, I believe, was so I did talk about the disparities in the earnings, and the other one was about the different stratification. Stratification economics suggests that there are multiple factors. Discrimination, however, continues to be one of the strongest predictors for maintaining the wealth inequality that we see in America today. So it's not education, it's blocked opportunities and access, especially when you consider that an African-American woman with a college degree, including a master's degree, is more likely to earn less than a white woman with a high school diploma. And so you ask me, what are the contributions of blacks to labor in America? I say we need to flip that. How can we look at the differences and the challenges, or how can we look at the differences and the changes over time in terms of the growing wealth inequality and ask, in what way were blacks not involved or contributing to that divide and that wealth gap? So in other words, I had a nice picture up here that said that, but in other words, we need to be asking, how can the wealth inequality that exists tell us, how do we not contribute to that through our labor in this economy? So that's it. And darn it, I had a picture of you. Well, I had Nova. I had Nova, too. I had a picture of Melba. So that's it, and I will turn it over to whomever's, whatever.
All right, at this time, we will open the floor if you have any questions for Dr. Laws and with her great presentation. Don't be afraid now. Ask your questions. We got her here.
In this one? Okay.
Thanks. Good afternoon. My name is DJ Murphy, UNC alum. I live in Carrboro. Just interested about the perspective for like black males in college. If you could talk about that a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, so, and I do have some data, actually. But what we do know, one, we in Chapel Hill at UNC, there's always been a problem, not only with recruiting black males, but graduating black males. And I have not looked at that data lately. Somebody might have the most recent data on that, but black males in general were admitted into or accepted into UNC were not finishing at an alarming level. I think it was high, something like 60%. I mean, it was high. And then also, one study that I saw that was done, I believe it was the Urban Institute. I want to say it was the Urban Institute. Something's telling me that's not right. There was one study that looked at the achievement rate even of athletes. So we know that oftentimes there's that stereotype, but there's some truth behind it. Many of the black males that we do see that are in high profile sports figures that go through our PWIs in particular. HBCUs, there's another story, but they also are having problems graduating black males. But going back to some of the gap, what we found is even when students come here as athletes, now everybody's not going to the NBA. Many of the students that played very hard for us, which was why I was for them getting some money, because the reality is many of them who don't do well, they're being set up for failure. And they were leaving this university unprepared to do something else other than dribble a ball or throw a ball down the field. And so black males are interesting to look at because we do see disparities even when they do get into colleges and universities. Their completion rates are the lowest. They are also lower than first generation students who come here and their families don't even speak English. So that is interesting. But then you look at the education data here in Chapel Hill. Let's take the Chapel Hill Carrboro City Schools. What we've seen that I think, and this is just me thinking now, not evidence-based data, what I think is there's a correlation, right? Because to that particular piece of information or data. The black kids in the Chapel Hill Carrboro City Schools are performing worse on end of grade reading tests than, again, first generation non-English speaking students or students from families where their parents speak very limited English. So when we start unpacking what's going on with black males, we can go all the way back to the K through 12 school system. We know there is a school to prison pipeline. Some say depending on what zip code you're born in, there's actually a cradle to prison pipeline. And so with black males, I'm hoping that we will begin to see some of this shift as we get more black males into education, because our young black men need to see black males in the schools, teaching them who have experienced, who understand. But many of them, it's a low-paying profession. So many of our black male students come from where they are the first generation or the second to ever go to college. And so it's multifactorial in terms of black males. What we are finding, my mom she called herself being smart. She said, I'm seeing Nova doing a whole lot of dancing. Is she practicing her reading and writing? And I'm like, yes, she is. You know she is. But let me remind you, most of the black millionaires out there made it as creatives. They didn't make it because they were running companies and so forth and so on. So that's so encouraging black males to do what the mayor identified today in a lovely way, to become a Kendrick Lamar, who credits a black male teacher for his success and his ability to overcome some of the challenges that he faced. So I'm not sure if I answered the question, but there's data that shows we get black males into college, but we can't get them out. What's the problem? I used to teach, I still do, I'm not teaching this semester. As an adjunct, I've taught at North Carolina Central, which I absolutely love. North Carolina State, which I had, I liked, but I literally, and people have heard me tell this story. There was a white kid that came in, and I was up front waiting for them to come in, and he was like, are you the professor? And I was like, yeah, I am. And he's like, this is really weird because the only black women I've seen are those that work for my family. He said that to me. And I don't know when I shared it with people if he was like trying to be smart because he was apparently given, the confidence to do that, to say what he wanted to say, or if he was being serious. And I thought about, where many students at that time were coming from, many of them from Eastern, rural areas and so forth and so on. And I said, this dude, he might be right. He actually might be right. But I was teaching at North Carolina Central, and I loved it. My husband would crack up, or, when I would come home and tell him the stories about my students there. But I loved teaching there, and I particularly loved teaching the black males. I love teaching black males. And I had a popular sociology course. And so I became the class for a lot of the athletes and other students. But I put in the time. I would have study sessions. And when I knew that they were about to fail, I would have study sessions and, really help them. And, I don't know if that's that same level investments across universities where there are young black men there. I saw them as this valuable, precious gem that God had entrusted me to educate. And the girls too, but they always had a lot of drama. So black males, we need to either make sure we're steering them into college and helping them to succeed. I know there's the TRIO program at UNC, and then there's that program, the McNair's program, there's there's the program for medical students, for black kids, in particular, but I think it's opened up for all race and ethnic minority groups there. But we need to invest in more of those. We've got the Blue Ribbon Mentoring Program here in Chapel Hill, and it really, I don't even come sometime to meetings where that's going to be discussed at the school board because, I ain't going to say I ain't going to catch no case, but I don't want to, because, you got to beg to make investments in programs that have the evidence behind it that will help kids do well. So we got to make that investment, and then we also have to have other paths and tracks for our black males to be creatives. To we want more Kendrick Lamars, and I don't know what he made Super Bowls. I don't know what he's making and what his wealth but I guarantee you it's 10 times more than what somebody's making just working in the regular industries. So black males are extremely important. We need to look at that. Your unemployment rates are higher than any other population. Young black males' unemployment rate, even with college degrees. Black women are out degreeing you. We are the most educated among all groups. We are the ones with the highest levels of PhDs out of all groups. Now, I went to school not online and not on knock online. I've taught online. I teach online, teach hybrid courses and so forth. But I went to school all the way from my BA, my MA, and my PhD, the traditional way where you had to get your butt up and make it across campus, sit in class and all that, right? And I can tell you, I was amazed, the black students that I saw that were going through on the MD track, down the MD track, who I'm not even sure, I don't even know, where many of them came from, but who had this sense of this resilience, this determination. And they were black, they were women and young black males. We need to highlight that. We need to go into some of these places where kids are putting their nose to the books and grinding. I didn't know who SZA was, and I tell people that's because I'd much rather have a book. I'd much rather in a corner somewhere reading or researching and stuff. I don't know. I didn't even know. I mean, I knew who Drake was. I mean, Kendrick Lamar, and They Did Not Like Us and all of that. But I'm so out of touch with that because I'm always looking at this data in terms of how we are doing, and I'm also trying to finish a book. Too, but black men are important. We need to look at them more. We need to look at them more. And then also need to look at the ones that are coming out of prison. The prison and the graveyard are the biggest deposits of wasted, exploited, or denied black talent in terms of black men. And that's just the reality. You die at a higher rate. You die younger. The chronic medical conditions. Look at Arif Ghadi, diabetes, died from stroke, related. So I'm glad you asked that question because that's a population we'll watch y'all play on the football field. We'll watch y'all play on the football field and the basketball field and dance and sing, but we won't invest in Blue Ribbon. We won't invest in programs to make sure that you're successful in other ways too.
All right, we have time for one more question.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Laws. That was amazing. I always like to hear the research and what happens in our history. And I thought about that and I was connecting the past to the current status. And I think about the labor and what they're talking about with DEI and different things that people are saying. I'm curious to know your thoughts on the correlation, maybe from what happened in history in the past and what is happening now, as far as with DEI and that, if you feel like you want to answer that.
Well, let me just say this about DEI and labor. Most of the DEI positions were white women. So when they said they were laying off DEI, I didn't really see it as a hit to black labor because many of the people were white women. And you can look at SHRM data on that, some of the stuff that they've put out around that. The same with USAID. One, I remember when I first got out of undergrad, I was trying to get a global, I wanted to go into the global space. One, because I wanted to travel abroad. So I was like, let me get a job. Let me see if I can get in the UN. Or let me see if I can get in State Department. And every single job required, and you're right, you're coming out of undergrad, required global experience. Now, I got my first passport and traveled abroad when I was in the 8th grade and a student at Phillips, and Miss Julia Fairley, my French teacher, who is also a mentor of mine to this day, took a group of us, black kids, Russell Dula, God rest his soul, Terry, I think David Elliott went too. It took a group of us to Europe as foreign exchange students. But I wasn't traveling abroad every summer like my counterparts in school. And in fact, I went from Pritchard Public Housing to UNC. So let me just say, well, we were living on Rogers Road at the time. We had just moved. My grandmother had just got her house she was so proud of on Rogers Road, and the landfill was still open, and it literally abutted her backyard. So anyway, but I grew up largely North Side area and on Pritchard. But many, so there's a disadvantage. So even with USAID, a lot of the workers don't look like me and you. And part of that is that advantage, that the different advantages that people have. So that's my spill on the impact of labor. I'm not sure it's impacting actual bodies. What it is impacting this culture, though, of recognition and acceptance and allowing and understanding that there are other people that are smart, that knows how to run the world and run things other than white men. And then if you really unpack that, they've been having some challenges running the world. So it ain't like they, right? And so that's sort of how I feel about the attacks on DEI, is that when you talk about actual bodies and seats and positions and places, I put out a post. They are hitting unintended targets. They are hitting unintended targets. But what I am concerned about is the culture, the change, and what that means, right? When you lock down and lock out groups of people who have proven time and time again, from building the pyramids in Egypt to blood plasma to building the White House to whatever, right? That they have the brains that could help this country in so many ways, undeniably so. Hidden figures and all of that, right? When we think about all of that, that is what is concerning, that we're only creating space for one group of people who had it not been for opportunity hoarding, generational wealth transference of generational wealth, and investment in them as white men, would not have, I'm not really sure where they got going in terms of, being, let's use the word they like to use, meritocracy. Now, meritocracy is a myth, as C. Wright Mills, I believe it was, that wrote it. Meritocracy is a myth. C. Wright Mills, I think, did that phenomenal analysis of meritocracy first, is a myth really in America. Because folk really don't get in positions because they worked really hard. And I like what people are saying, and I've said it before. I've got a few speeches from back in the early 2000s where I said, how can you tell people to pull themselves up from their bootstraps when as folks would say, they don't even have any boots. Where the boots? And here you are sitting over here with a walk-in closet full. So, yeah.
All right. Thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Michelle Laws, for that powerful presentation.
Amazing. As I said earlier, we can always learn from folks. And truth-telling is essential in these days and times. I mentioned his name earlier, but I do want him to stand up because he is our newest council member. You see who he is, Councilmember Cristóbal Palmer. He is a welcome addition to our council, and I just want to formally recognize him. And where is Michelle? Oh, she's right. You want to do the intro?
Excuse me, we are going to take just 5 minutes just to transition in between our speakers. Manager of the African American Culture, Arts, and History Center in Burlington, North Carolina. Prior to this latest appointment, he served for 20 years as the director of the Bonner Center for Community Service and Learning at Guilford College. He also, his community involvement includes being chairman of the board for Snow Camp Historical Society Elimu Empowerment Services, and the nonprofit Motherland International. He currently serves as Vice President of the Piedmont Blues Preservation Society. For over 20 years, Mr. Shields has given numerous dramatic presentations and lectures on the Underground Railroad to local schools and civic groups. James served as one of the lead guides for the Underground Railroad tours conducted on Guilford College campus. He is also known for his work as an actor and director in the drama produced by Snow Camp Outdoor Theater, Pathway to Freedom, which depicts the history of the Underground Railroad in Guilford and Alamance counties. James has been a performing artist for over 20 years in various theatrical productions and is currently a member of the reggae band Dub Fire. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Mr. James Shields.
Lord, how come me here? Lord, how come me here? Lord, how come me here? I wish I never was born. They treat me oh so mean, Lord. They treat me oh so mean, Lord. They treat me oh so mean, Lord. I wish I never was born. Lord, how come me here? Lord, how come me here? Lord, how come me here? I wish I never was born. Good evening, everyone. I want to thank everybody for inviting me here today. I'm just really happy to be here to share a little bit and share some stories. Black History Month is so crucial. Of course, we know when it was first started, it was just Black History Week, right? Or Negro History Week. And so we only got a week. And for a lot of us, a month is not enough. I am currently the manager at the African American Cultural Arts and History Center just down the road in Burlington, and we do this 24/7, 365 days a year. And we tell people that I will come speak to you on the other 11 months of the year, and so we certainly want to see you. But what I want to do today is, one, tell you a little bit about our center, weave in some history from your neighbors next door, Alamance County, and try to stick with the theme of labor, because our story, as you've heard, is labor. We have labored, and so like when we say we built this country, we're not just playing around, right? We're not just, we have the proof. We have the proof. So I do want to talk a little bit about the center, just how we got started, some of the things that we focus on, and as we get to certain parts, the one part in particular that I want to focus on is going to be the railroad, because Burlington is not Burlington had it not been for the railroad. So the African American Cultural Arts and History Center was started many years ago. Even before 2017, when we got our 501c3. It was started by Miss Jane Sellers. Miss Jane Sellers grew up in Alamance County, and one of the things that she recognized is that when we opened up various books about the history of Alamance County, guess what? Black people wasn't in it. I mean, you've got all these incredible books about 100 years of Burlington, Alamance at War, and all these things, right? I mean, books written way back in the 1900s 1800s that said things like, slavery was a blessing in disguise, and it's really good that we were able to half civilize the Negroes when we brought them over here, right? And so Miss Jane Sellers saw that, and she's like, okay, we have to do something. She started by, she wanted to bring some recognition to a place in Burlington called Richmond Hill. And it's the black part of town in the north part of I think they're in Greensboro. I live in Greensboro. And she wanted to have it designated, or part of it, as a historic district. Now, of course, what I think is valuable might be different from what you think is valuable. And so when she went to the preservation people in Alamance County, well, that building, it's not that old. That building has new windows on it, and not really thinking about the fact, yeah, but that was a building where Dr. William Shanks was, who was one of the only doctors that we had. Half of the black folks older than 60 years old say, William Shanks was my doctor. I was birthed by Dr. William Shanks. So his house, his office is significant, and it means something to those people, right? So these were some of the things that she wanted to do. She would do exhibits, pop-up exhibits, and she would go to any place. She would come talk to people. She would go to libraries, churches, or wherever. Now, unfortunately, she passed away in 2019, and she didn't live to see our physical space that we have now. Behind her is her daughter, Shanice Sellers. She's our executive director, and she picked it up. She's not a historian. She's into history, but that's just not her thing. But that was her mother's passion and her vision, and she wasn't going to just let it go away, which I appreciate. And so behind them is the McRae School, which was a Rosenwald school, or a Washington Rosenwald school, and so we will talk more about that soon. We do tours, we do genealogy work. We're really proud of the oral history project that we've been doing now for about 7 years. We've been working with Elon. We have now about 60 oral histories. And it's been so crucial to talk with the elders, because once they're gone, all those stories are gone. Young folks, and I include myself with the young folks. I'm not trying to be old, but talk to your people, right? I grew up just down the road in Durham, and almost every time I go home, I'm asking my mom these questions for her to tell me these stories. Like, she's 87, she'll be 88 this year, and I want to get those stories from her. And so it's so important. So those are some of the things that we do. We love to bring youth in because I'm telling you, when they come in and the things that they don't know makes me want to cry. But then it makes me mad, because what are they teaching our kids? I don't care what color they are. What are they teaching our kids? And so that is part of our mission as well. So one of the things that we do is, when you come to our center, we like to start with Africa. Now, you're probably thinking now, so what does this have to do with labor? Trust me, we are going to get there. So our history doesn't start in chains. Imagine a little black boy sitting in a class, or a black girl sitting in the class. Now we're going to do the history of African Americans, and you start with slavery. What does that tell me as a young kid? What does that tell the Latino kid, the Asian kid, and the white kid about me? So instead of starting with slavery, we start with this place, this continent. I can't tell you how many people, including college students, who come in and say, oh, Africa's a country, right? No, Africa is not a country. It is one of the largest continent. You can fit North America, South America, and all kinds of in that, right? Sudan is one of the, has most of the pyramids that are still standing are in the Sudan. Down here, that's Nigeria, y'all. You know, but yet people, when they meet somebody from Africa, oh, you guys are from the jungle, you guys are chasing monkeys and all this. I'm like, why are we not educating people about our homeland? So, and I spent a lot of time at Guilford College working with immigrants and refugees, especially from Africa. And it was such a chore trying to bring them together with African Americans because of the prejudice that we've had against our own people, you know, our cousins. So we start with Africa. Then, of course, we talk about slavery. This is a map of the slave population in North Carolina back in 1860. And here we are, here's Orange County, here's Alamance County, here's Guilford County. This is the Hall River that then flows into the Neuse River. You might not be able to see, but all these numbers are the percentages of enslaved Africans in each county. And so Orange County, 30%, Alamance County, 30%, Chatham, 30%. One of the things I think is important to note that everything on this side of the river, see how things are starting to get dark? Partly because of the soil. The soil was different. And so you look at Caswell County and everything east of that, that's where we're growing our rice. That's where we're growing our tobacco. Tobacco culture is huge. My people came out of tobacco culture. They left, where are we? They left Franklin County, for example, and
50% up there?
yes, 68%, 58%. Yes, so the darker it is, the higher the percentage. And so my folks migrated from Franklin County to Durham County. And of course, there is no Durham County yet. It's right in there. But they went there and to work for Liggett & Myers, American Tobacco, because that's what they knew. I'll never forget being able to go downtown. And I don't smoke, but I would love going down and smelling that tobacco in the warehouses. I miss that. Like they should just like pipe that in just so you can get the, yeah. But one of the things I wanted to show you though is that Alamance County, Guilford County, Randolph, Chatham, in some ways, some of these other counties, maybe Davie, is what we call the Quaker Belt. Why is it the Quaker Belt? Because that's where Quakers came. Quakers came to Alamance County and Snow Camp around the middle of the 1700s. What they also brought with them was a sentiment that was anti-slavery. They were abolitionists. And so that's why you see the 18% in Guilford County, even though you have the 30% in Alamance, most of the Underground Railroad stuff happened in Guilford County, but people would come from Alamance and then they would go to Guilford and then they would, then they would go up this way, up into Virginia, Fancy Gap, places like that, and then they would end up either in Ohio or they would go to the coast and they would get a boat. And they would either go north or they would go south. Some went south to Florida before it was a state. Others would go to Haiti because Haiti was free. I heard about those slaves in Haiti that revolted. Let's go down there. And so people would do that. So this was so we talk about labor, of course, in North Carolina. Most of the labor was agriculture. We heard earlier about cotton. Up here, tobacco. When I was about 14, My grandfather made me work tobacco one summer, prime tobacco. And if anybody knows what I'm talking about, your back's probably hurting right now. just to hear about it, right? And I lasted 2 weeks. 2 weeks longer than my grandfather thought I was gonna last. But I was gonna show him, right? But 2 weeks was enough, okay? I get the message. I'm going to school. I'm gonna learn, So agriculture in Alamance County, for example, was huge. We had the Hope Plantation. He had close to 60 enslaved Africans, and we also had textile mills and whatnot as well. We talked about the Underground Railroad, okay? This is an ad from the newspaper, and this is a person who ran away. He was a blacksmith by trade, which means he was very valuable. He had a skill. But also the significant thing here is that he was last seen at New Garden. Now, where's New Garden? New Garden is in Guilford County. New Garden is what we now call Guilford College, where the Underground Railroad was happening, where the Quakers were. So if you got to New Garden, that guy was gone. We know that there were anywhere between 3,000 to 4,000 people that came through Guilford County, mainly because people like Levi Coffin and others, but also we are now starting to see that not just in North Carolina, but all over, that black folks were more involved in gaining their freedom than we knew before, because it was mainly Quakers and other people kind of patting themselves on the back. See what we did, but we didn't talk about those black folks. For example, there was a man called Hamilton's Saul. Saul worked for somebody else. That's why he was Hamilton's Saul. But he worked with the Coffins, and so when he would find someone who may have been kidnapped or a coffle of slaves, was coming through, he would go tell the Coffins, and the Coffins would try to figure out how do we save this person. And so they did that many times. Here's another one specific to company shops. And this person was living in Hillsborough, and they decided, I'm kind of tired of Hillsborough, and I'm going to try to escape. And so he did. And he was probably working for company shops, and that's something that we will talk about here in a few minutes. When Alamance County or Burlington, when it became Alamance County around 1849, it had been part of Orange County. The main thing that happened was the railroad. When the railroad started being built during that time, and that's when we separated from Orange County. At 1830, Orange County had over 7,000 enslaved Africans. By 1860, Orange County only had 5,000, and Alamance County had about 3,600, okay? So still, you had a lot of enslaved Africans. So why was the railroad created? One, because the western part of the state, which means everything west of Raleigh, was dead. Nothing was going on. There was no way to get your crops anywhere unless you knew how to navigate a river. So farmers were kind of just stuck. And so this railroad was crucial. North Carolina at the time was known as the Rip Van Winkle state because, again, we were asleep. Virginia was booming. South Carolina was booming. All of the stuff that we heard about earlier about the slave labor that was being used. And so the railroad grew trade. from western counties to eastern ports. That was so crucial. They built the railroad it went from Raleigh to Salisbury, and then eventually to Charlotte. So, who built the railroad? Over 1,800 enslaved Africans built the railroad. Building the railroad took over 5 years, and it required the largest mobilization of manpower the state had ever seen. Slave manpower, okay? Workers began clearing land, grading the roadbeds from Goldsboro to Charlotte. They had started laying track. They had started doing all these things. What were some of the things that they did? Some of the tasks that these men would do. They would clear the land of thousands of trees, excavate and grade the earth with plows and handheld grader. Think about it. Grading, now they use these huge, machines now. But back then you had to use men. And that's why they needed so many. One thing I want to mention about the enslaved men that worked as enslaved Africans that worked on it, they were rented out. As they would go, they would contract with slave owners, and the slave owners would rent them out for X amount of money. It was win-win, at least for them, because I am getting paid. I don't have to feed this guy. I don't have to clothe this guy. I don't have to house him, and it's all great. The problem with that was a lot of these people lived on plantations like the Hope Plantation in Alamance County, like the Stagville Plantation, where they had been there literally for generations. Now all of a sudden you've been sent to work on the railroad, and you've been sent away from your family. Family was important, so don't get it twisted, because a lot of times, family wasn't important for slaves, but no, trust me, it was. We know, for example, that when a slave, a lot of times when a slave escaped, they didn't necessarily go north. We always hear that, oh yeah, they're going north. No, a lot of times, where are my people? Where are my people? And I want to go find my people. So these were some of the things that they did. These were some of the things that they did. Free black workers and white workers, they lived together. But the enslaved workers worked in these camps that was just dirty, full of disease, it was just bad. And there are several cases where there was a slave who got TB, tuberculosis, and then they sent him home to his farm, and he gave everybody else TB. So the health was not great. And of course, when slavery was over during Reconstruction, who do we think did the work then? Again, I trust we did not compare notes, but one of the things we talk about the 13th Amendment, but the 13th Amendment allowed men like this to continue to build the railroad farther down to Asheville. These were men that did even dirtier work, because once you got to Asheville, you're having to dig tunnels, you're having to blast, you're having to do all these things. Many black men were killed because they were convicts. And let me go back, not just black men, they were black women who worked on these gangs, worked on these work gangs as well. And so I think that's important to note. Spencer Thomas came to what we call company shops, what is now Burlington, with his master, who worked for the North Carolina Railroad Company. And so he came here He was an apprentice in a tin shop, and so he had that skill. And so when slavery was over, he became a leader. So what do we do when we get freedom? One of the first things that we did, right? Schools and churches. Schools and churches. And Spencer Thomas created first of all, created what was started out as Company Shops Baptist Church and was later named First Baptist Church. Now in Burlington, we got two First Baptist churches. Now, I don't live in Burlington, so I ask for forgiveness when I just say First Baptist Church, because we got First Baptist Church on Apple Street, that's the black church. And then we got First Baptist Church. But First Baptist Church on Apple was the First Baptist Church. So to me, if you're first, you're first. But, but we all know why they did that, so. He also opened what we think is the first black-owned business in downtown, Company Shops, later to be known as Burlington. Okay, so business was happening from the very beginning of this city. Eventually, Worth Street, other people would come, and that area, like a lot of black business districts in our country, it was called Black Bottom. There was no bottom to it. It was black, but there was no bottom to it. But again, when you put those names onto things, it gives it a negative tone, right? And so that was on purpose. The circle there is a circle of, it's a photo of Worth Street, and you can barely see where it says Thomas and Sons. And so that is where the first black business in Burlington was. Here's a article about Spencer Thomas and John Lane. John Lane was another man who got to Alamance County because of the railroad. And when slavery was over, he actually was a commissioner for Company Shops and is credited with coming up with the name Burlington. They were trying to figure out, what do we call this place? Because we don't want to be Company Shops anymore. And they're going back and forth. Somebody came up with the name Carolina-delphia. And they were like, nah, I don't think we're going to do that one, right? And apparently there was some bull that would roam free in the streets of Company Shops, and his name was Burling. And John Lane said, why don't we just name the city after Burling? And so it ends up being Burlington. Yeah. Yeah. They just let them walk around. I mean, this was the 1800s, so, you know. Wyatt Outlaw was also one of the leaders that stepped up during the days of Reconstruction. And he, not only had he served in the Union Army, so he escaped from Alamance County. He was a biracial man. His father was a very rich man, Chelsea Fawcett, in Alamance County, but he escaped. So imagine this, it's Reconstruction, and most white men have pretty much been set aside from political power at this point. Black men are stepping up. You have what they call the Union League, which was part of the Republican Party. Wyatt Outlaw was one of the leaders. Wyatt Outlaw was also a commissioner for Graham, which was the county seat, or is the county seat, but he was also a constable. So what do you think is happening? Black men are stepping up. Black men are in positions of power. Black men have businesses. Wyatt Outlaw had a business. He was a carpenter. He also had a bar. And many of the Republicans, both black and white, would come and they would meet at his place. And so they would strategize. And so that's what he was doing. And in the words of the young people, he was doing too much. Yes, he was doing too much. And so, on February 26, 1870, a group of men in sheets, they went to his house that he shared with his two sons and his mother. They dragged him from the house, took him to the front of the courthouse in Graham. Some say they think he may be buried at that statue, that famous statue that we have, if you haven't heard about our statue, the Confederate one. And that's why they don't want to tear it down, because that's, again, history is a thing, right? Stories are something else, right? So he was lynched. And they put a sign on him, said, "Beware ye guilty parties, both black and white." Because the Republican Party was biracial. It was black and white people. And that scared the hell out of folks, especially white men. You got white men who are coming back from the war. If they had land, it may be gone. If they still have their land, they probably couldn't afford to pay the taxes on it. You got black men, for example, working on the railroad, and I can't get a job on the railroad. So they're not happy. I'm not making excuses for them, don't get me wrong. But so their response, their pushback was, let's form the White Brotherhood. Let's form the Ku Klux. And that's what they did. And so they started going through Alamance County, terrorizing people who were either part of the Union League or who were Republican, anybody who didn't agree with them. And white and black, men and women, children were killed. The whole nine, they were wilding out, as they say. So, to your left is Governor William Holden. William Holden was the governor at the time. He was a Republican, and he had decided that Alamance County and Caswell County were an insurrection. And so he decided to call in former Army people to start to round up the Klan. One of the leaders of the Klan, at least they claim, was this man, Josiah Turner. Josiah Turner had been a president of the North Carolina Railroad Company, so he knew the area. He actually, when he became the president, he wanted to fire all the black folks because our white men have to have jobs, right? Again, a lack of meritocracy. And so, but the problem was he found out, one, white men wanted to get paid more, and they didn't do the job as well as the black men. So that plan didn't work very well, didn't last very long, and black men were back on the railroad again. But he was a racist. He owned a newspaper called the Raleigh Sentinel. And so he stayed in William Holden's case about the things that he were doing, giving power to the Negroes and all this, and every day it was something, it was something. And so finally, William Holden had Josiah Turner arrested. He suspended writs of habeas corpus, meaning they just threw people in jail. No bail, no lawyer, no nothing. And so when he finally got out of jail, Josiah Turner kept at it, to the point that the Democrats, known as the conservatives back then, they retook the legislature. And the first thing they did was they impeached William Holden. They impeached him, and in spite of the fact, 61 people, black and white, from Alamance County, who testified about what happened to them, including the mother of Wyatt Outlaw. In spite of that, of course, he was found guilty, which they were going to do that anyway, and he was literally run out of the state. He was literally run out of the state. It was at that point that, at least in Alamance County, black men were effectively disenfranchised. They were not able to vote because of intimidation, because of fear of violence, and all those things. So, and I show these men because 100 years pass before we are able to elect William Shanks to the school board, Jack O'Kelly to the city council, still the only black man to be on the Burlington City Council. Still.
Which one?
Jack O'Kelly. David Maynard was on the county commissioners. Again, I can count on one hand how many black folks have been elected. Now we finally have a black woman who was elected to the city council in Burlington. We have a black man and a black woman on the school board now. So things are changing, but very slowly. And I wanted to put Elijah Shaw up there because while he never won office, he really pushed. He was really involved in education. His daughter integrated Western Alamance. And Miss Pamela, I just saw her a couple of weeks ago, and I keep trying to get an interview with her, but she is so bitter from those days, she didn't want to talk about it. To this day, she will not talk about it. She'll say a little bit, and then she'll stop and say, I just can't go further. So this is the area of Worth Street where businesses were, even after the days of Reconstruction. Here you have a Negro tenement house. Here you have a tobacco spot that was partly owned by a black man. These other buildings belong to black people. And then here, you might not be able to read that, but it says Darky Schoolhouse. And so we had the Darky Schoolhouse, which eventually got burned down. And so Worth Street was a place where we had our businesses. We had everything from grocery stores to bars to schools. We had the tin shop, carpentry, furniture makers. We had all of that. So again, former enslaved Africans are bringing their skills. And they're bringing their skills to create an economy. Most of those buildings, or most of those folks were pushed out. So between 1880 and 1980, eventually all those businesses were pushed out, and they were pushed to the north side of town on Rawhut Street. And so, for example, this is the Palace Barbershop. Is one of the oldest, was one of the oldest shops in Burlington. It's not being used right now, but when you walk in there, it looks just like it did 50 years ago. The same chairs, the same, remember where they used to have the things with the colored water that you would put your combs in, to sanitize them, and all that is there, right? So it's really neat. This is this was the only black dentist in town, Dr. Thomas, and then Dr. Shanks, his office is here. This is his house, and this is his office. Now again, you drive by there, you wouldn't think anything about it, but if I grew up in Burlington, if I grew up on that side of town, every time I see that, I have fond memories of that. Maybe not the dentist, but again, very, very important. And the one thing that I want to note, especially when we're talking about labor and things like that, most of the men that we talk to and many of the women that we have interviewed, these are men and women who left the area either for the military or for college or whatever, but they all came back home. Burlington and Alamance County was their home. That's where their family was. And so they came and they went away and they got their skills and they came back home. We have one of the first interviews that I did was from a dentist. Her name is Rosalind Crisp. She was one of the first black women to get her dental degree here at Carolina. And she talks about how when she was a little kid, so we have a carousel at the city park. Really beautiful, is it Hunsel, I think is what they call it. You know, really, really nice, right? But if you were black, you couldn't go there. And when she was a little kid, she's driving in the car with her dad. Dad, can we go to the carousel? Oh, not today, baby. Those of us of a certain age, we've kind of heard that before, right? Well, why can't we go to McDonald's? Or why can't we go to Shoney's? Or why can't we go to, so why we got to go on the side of the road to eat when we go on a trip? I didn't mind that myself, to be honest with you, because my mom's fried chicken, you know, and whatever else she would put together in that basket, I didn't need the McDonald's, right? But she talked about, excuse me, but she talked about that. She talked about how her father would drive all the way to Greensboro just to get ice cream. I'm not going to the back door. We have kids that come to the place and they ask us, well, I asked them because we have a picture of people marching in Burlington when Dr. King was killed. And you could see this place called Zach's Hot Dogs. And you could see the sign. And so I asked the young people, so how many of y'all have been to Zach's? And most of them raised their hand. You know, if you live there, you've been there at least once. And I said, do you know that most of us in this room, if we wanted a hot dog from Zach's, we would have to go to the back door? And they would look at me like, what? Yes. And I can tell you, I've had so many people come in and say, you know, well, my father told me I better not ever see you at that back door for a hot dog. And people would drive to Durham or drive to Greensboro to get a hot dog from someone who's going to give it to them in the front door, not the back door. So that was so important. And why it was so important for these businesses. So even if I didn't have a business in Burlington, I could drive to Greensboro. I could drive to Durham, right? So you didn't know there was going to be a test today, right? So name the school desegregation case decided in 1954. Okay, very good, very good. So this was crucial, especially in Alamance County and in most places in the South. Now we could go to other schools. Now the question is, was that necessarily a good thing? Okay. For example, we had the Washington Rosenwald schools. These were schools that were built through a partnership with Booker T. Washington and Julius Rosenwald. And unfortunately, I have to explain to the young people who Booker T. Washington is, right? So it makes my job harder, but that's okay. And so these were schools that were built all over the South. Over $70 million were spent. And this, we just about 2 years ago, we refurbished this school, which is the McCray School on 62. So it's standing today. We have a classroom there. We bring kids there, and we do some class stuff with them so they can know how it was. It has an outhouse too, but we haven't gotten any other young kids to use the outhouse. They won't do it. They won't do it. So the Rosenwald schools were crucial. If it wasn't for the Rosenwald schools, most black kids, especially in the rural South, they don't go to school at all. Okay. This is Jordan Sellers High School. Jordan Sellers was the black high school in Burlington. And in 1968, they decided to close Jordan Sellers and they decided to start sending kids to Williams High School, which was the large white high school in Burlington. Now, one of the things that I like to do when people come, so we have a collection of yearbooks from Jordan Sellers, Graham, Negro School, and some of the other places. One of the first things I do, especially with the white groups, right? And I open up the book to the faculty. And I said, what stands out to you? And they said, well, they're all black. I said, okay. Now let's dig deeper. What kind of education do you think those young black boys and girls got when they were being taught by people that they probably lived in the neighborhood with? They're being taught by people they probably went to church with. They're being taught by people that their parents probably went to school with. It's different. You're being nurtured. You're being taught by people who aren't afraid of you, right? Kind of similar to the question that the young man had earlier. It's kind of hard to teach young black boys if you're afraid of them. From the gate, you're afraid because of preconceived notions that you have. And so it's so important. And so one of the questions that I like to put out is, did we integrate or did we just simply desegregate? And a lot of people say, wow, okay, I never thought about it that way, right? Because they just assume integration was a good thing. Well, Martin Luther King says it's good and everybody else says it's good, but then, you know, again, I grew up just down the road. And I went to Hillside. My mama went to Hillside. Her father went to Hillside. My nieces and nephews went to Hillside. And there's a culture, even today, it's in a different building from when I was in, but the culture is still the same. It's black culture, right? And so this is what was lost. This is what was lost. And so what's the answer to that question that I just asked? Well, you know, it was desegregation. Walter Williams High School in 1969 had over 1,400 students, and only 60 were black. They were promised that they could come and that they could take part in clubs, they could do this, that, and the other, but the reality is they were being threatened with violence. They were being, literally, weapons, firearms, the whole 9 yards, and the authorities were looking the other way. The young black students, they had grievances, and so they went to the superintendent of the schools downtown. He said, I'm not trying to talk to y'all. And so they trashed his office and they left. And they went back to Williams High School and they led a walkout. There was at least 2 classes still left at Jordan Sellers. They walked out and they walked downtown to Williams High School and joined their friends because they all lived in the neighborhood together, right? And so they came back and they did that. Well, they were not going to have black folks wilding out in the middle of Burlington. So the cops dispersed them, pushed them back to their neighborhood. Well, they were still kind of riled up. And so the cops came to their neighborhood and they literally occupied Rawhut Street. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. They said, look, we can't go. There are a lot of places in Burlington we cannot go. And we be damned if you're going to come to our neighborhood with guns and smoke bombs and all this other kind of stuff. And so they stood their ground. They threw bottles, they threw rocks, they did all that. There's claims that there were snipers, though we don't have proof of that. Unfortunately, a young man, Leon Mebane, was shot and killed. There are claims that he was looting, even though the business that he was shot in front of had already been burned and looted and there was nothing there. His mother says that when the cops came, that he held up his hands. But he was shot anyway 17 times. His mother never got over it. His father, what we used to call back in the day, had a nervous breakdown. And he never got over it, couldn't even go to the funeral. And you might not be able to read it from there, but I always thought it was ironic that the very time that that this was going on, we're getting ready for a moon flight. And it reminded me of Gil Scott-Heron, right? Rat done bit my sister Nell, but Whitey on the moon. Y'all ever heard that song? Look it up if you hadn't read. And, but this is what was going on. And a lot of people were confused. A lot of white people were confused because our Negroes have always been good. We never had any trouble. There was one car from Durham. See, that's what it was. Outside agitators. Not the fact that we have textile mills where black people couldn't work. We had the Western Electric plant where black people couldn't work. You ran our businesses out of downtown now, going back to the theme of labor, right? So you've kind of restricted how I can make money for my family. Yeah, I'm not happy. I'm not happy. But yet these were things that were not addressed. You know, a lot of times, as long as people can make do for their family, they're not going to raise a bunch of fuss. But people were struggling because they couldn't get jobs. So that was really important. Really quickly, Jerome Evans was a coach. He was Remember the Titans before it was Remember the Titans. And he was the one who, you know, kind of got things calmed down. They got rid of the white coach who was popular, and they put him in, hopefully to calm things down. And it did for a little bit, but didn't solve any problems. It really didn't solve any problems. Yes, sir.
That movie's about...
No, it's not. But what I'm saying is he did what he did before Herman Boone. He was probably about a year or so ahead of Herman Boone in terms of being a black coach going to a white school. And so I just want to end by, first of all, things that we do. We, of course, for example, we honor many of the women in Alamance County, many of the men in Alamance County. There's several here, including Dr. Crisp, who I talked about earlier, several other women who, many of them who have stayed in our community. They went off to college, they went to other places, but they came back home. And so it is really important for us, and we have interviews with all of these women. And this is that's not even half of what we have. Bobby Bennett was an alum of Jordan Sellers High School, and he sung with the Famous Flames. Who did the Famous Flames play with? Damn, thank you, Lord. The kids, I tell you, who's James Brown? Sometimes I just point to the door, just leave, right? I'm like, you don't understand. There is no hip hop without James Brown. There's no Chris Brown without James Brown. There's no Usher without James Brown. I mean, come on, you know? Was a band leader for James Brown. Again, Jordan Sellers High School in Burlington. We also do tours. We do tours of Raw Hut Street because we want people to see these businesses, right? Because as it was said earlier, you know, there's this thing, oh, well, folks are lazy. They don't want to work. They don't want to do this, that, and the other. But yet, here are all these businesses. What happened to the businesses, right? Now, some people say, well, you opened the mall, and we started going to the mall, and we started doing this. And a lot of the black dollars, they don't stay like they used to. I mean, I was used to Durham, right? And my grandfather would tell me about Hayti and about the height of Hayti. And he would point at all these different buildings, right? Again, we were industrious. We had skills, And we use those skills to build churches, to do other things. You could literally live and die in Durham and your money stays with a black business. We had insurance, we had insurance, we had a hospital, we had our own college, several funeral homes. Again, you could live and die. Okay? So it's really important for us to share these stories. History is nothing but stories, right? You know, a lot of times kids say, I don't like it, I don't like to deal with history. Well, probably because somebody's teaching you name and dates. They're not giving you context, they're not telling you stories. It's stories. Like I can tell you Martin Luther King did this, that, and the other on this date. But wouldn't it be better if I told you the story of him sitting in a jail in Montgomery, or maybe even tell you the story of my father who was on his security detail when he was in Norfolk, right? I got a picture, I'm really proud of that, right? You know, so when you can make it personal and real, then you can understand. Yes, you need to know the names and the dates, but you need to know the stories too. And it sheds a light on Alamance County African Americans who served in the armed forces. Because again, we don't get the recognition. There was a book that was written after World War II, Alamance at War. Not a black face in it. Not one. You know? And so when you come to our place and when you see the exhibit, you'll see close to 50 men and women in every branch of the service, going back at least as far back as World War II, including Tuskegee Airmen. Okay, so all that is so crucial. We also want to show the kids at school. These are kids from Graham Negro School, and look how they're dressed. Yeah. Not a pajama pants to be seen. Right. Not one. And then, of course, you know, here's a photo from when folks did their protest about the Confederate statue. We weren't quite as aggressive as Chapel Hill was. Well, they got us before we had a chance, I think is what it was. But soon come, as the Ross would say. So we tell stories. And again, our whole point is to tell and shed light on the contributions. You heard earlier about the monetary contributions. Billions and billions and billions of dollars. But yet here we are, 2025, trying to discount us, trying to disrespect our history, right? But we're not going to let that happen. So I do want to invite you this Saturday, to Burlington. It's not that far, and at the Paramount Theater, and we're going to be screening several of the interviews that we've done. They've been pared down to about 5 minutes each, and most, if not all, of the people will be there, except for, of course, Miss Jane Sellers, because she passed away in 2019. But it's going to be at 2 o'clock at the Paramount Theater in downtown Burlington. So we hope you will come and see. These are people, again, people who have skills like Dr. Baldwin, Dr. Chris, Faith Blackwell, and like all of these are, again, these are people, these aren't just folks, but they are just folks. And I want to leave you with this quote from one of my favorites, Dr. Eddie Glaude Jr. How, what, and who we celebrate reflects what and who we value. And how we celebrate our past reflects ultimately who we take ourselves to be today. Thank you.
I'm going to open the floor for a few questions that we have for Mr. Shields. Excellent, I learned a lot. Real quick,
By any chance, did you see any data about the effects of intimidation, not just the Ku Klux Klan that came going in that area, but like intimidation with stories that went on in Burlington, how that affected blacks getting, not just working, but getting businesses and being.
Exactly. So I would contend that Alamance in 1870 was the template. Okay? That was the template. Partly using the newspaper to vilify black folks, using the newspaper to say, you know, white supremacy, white supremacy, white supremacy. I'm not making this stuff up, y'all. I've gone through years and years of newspapers. Don't take my word for it. Go to newspaper.com, you can look it up, Alamance Gleaner, Daily Times News, all these papers where there are articles where people are, we gotta rise up. We can't let the Negroes take over. I mean, they're very explicit. There's no dog whistles here. It's megaphones, okay? And so this is what was going on in North Carolina. So even though 30 years passed, because part of the issue was they didn't have full control. Remember the map I showed you with the darker part, 60% black, 70% black. Well, when Reconstruction happened, what do you think happened in terms of the representation in the legislature? Okay? So for a while, maybe 20 years or so, you had representation from those counties, from those eastern spots. Well, between then and 1898 in Wilmington, all of that was wiped out. And then to make sure that it stayed wiped out, we get a state constitutional amendment in 1900 that basically disenfranchised all black men in the state of North Carolina. There was a poll tax and there was a literacy tax. Now, the thing about that was, illiterate white men would say, well, what about us? Because you're not going to keep us from voting, are you? And kind of wink, wink, no, don't worry, you know, we got you. As a matter of fact, I have a copy of a voter registration form from 1901, and it belongs to a white man, and he signed it with an X. So he was still able to vote. Now, had a black man come with a master's degree, they would have figured something out. So basically, from 1870, where we focused primarily in Alamance and Caswell, but it spread. Because once they saw that we could do it here, they realized we can do it all over the state by using fraud, by using intimidation. And at some point, you get conditioned. And even now, we're dealing with that conditioning, right? People still, white and black, I don't go on that side of town. I don't deal with folks unless I have to work with them, right? And so it's hard, but we as a country, we have to deal with literally 400 years of conditioning about how we deal with each other, right? But when it comes to voting, shouldn't be a question. We got 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, and men like Wyatt Outlaw and John Lane and all these others said, this is what you guys promised. And so I should be able to vote without getting freaking lynched. But that was not the case. And again, you think about it, so you've got 1870 all the way, almost 100 years before we get the civil rights and the voting rights. And people are still trying to push back on that.
That's right.
Right? Yeah, my daughter was on that list of 60,000. We were going through the list, I said, it's my daughter. And I mean, I know that she's legit and everything, but still. And it just shows you the lengths that people will go to maintain power. Fred Douglass tells us that, you know, power does not concede. You know, you gotta take it. You know? So, yeah. Any more
We have
questions?
anyone else?
history is always important to know, and I always think about, and I'm going to use again past or present, do you think that when I'm listening to what happened back then, and just now, not even just what's going on presently the way it is, just our trajectory throughout, do you think things have changed? Or are they the same? Because I feel like we move forward to the 30 steps back, and it seems like there's this thing, so I'm just curious to hear your take on that.
So, I heard a long time ago, I heard a famous historian say that being a historian brings a certain amount of trauma. Because you study this stuff, right? And what I have studied, now most of my work has been mainly antebellum, right? Before the Civil War, Underground Railroad, stuff like that. But then Reconstruction. I've been focusing a lot on Reconstruction as well, which I think is the most important era of this country because of what didn't happen. Right. Okay? Both Southern and Northern whites, they pretty much left us out to dry. They told the Southern guys, you know what? You do whatever. We're done. We're going to go back up north. You know, you do your thing. And we'll do our thing. So we'll keep them in check the way we keep them in check in the north, and you keep them in check down here. What I have seen in terms of a pattern has been pushback. Anytime we make a little bit of progress, there's pushback. So instead of thinking, you know, we went through a civil war, 600,000 men killed, why don't we just drop the drama and try to make this country be what it can be, right? We got all these black men and women with all these skills, but instead you get scared up in the north. You had the riots because the black men were coming up with skills and taking jobs. Same thing down here, okay? Fast forward to the Jim Crow era, World War I. Black men are going to Europe and they're fighting, and then they come back and they're getting lynched in their uniforms. World War II happened. Okay, well, we'll try it again. And we go. And we got to struggle just to serve. Because they know how great we are. That's the thing I think when you really look at history. You know about our greatness. And our greatness we gave to this country. We gave to this country. But let's not talk about that. And so every time there's pushback, Civil rights movement, there was pushback. And then we get the Reagan era, which I never thought we would live through anything worse than the Reagan era, at least for black folks, right? Okay? So we start moving forward again. We even get Obama in there. Oh God, people lost their minds. Again, we all know this, right? And so, at what point do we, as the poem says, let America be America again? At what point do we allow this country to truly be great? You know, when we say, you know, make America great again, you know, and I love to have those conversations with people. I had a guy come into the center, because sometimes folks just come just to spy, just see what we talk about, right? And he was one of those, he was a Make America Great Again person. And I said, fine, but tell me when.
That's right. Yeah.
Tell me when, because if we're talking about America being great, that means great for everybody.
Right.
And you think about World War II. Wouldn't that have been a perfect time for us to come together? Wouldn't that have been a perfect time that black men could have taken advantage of the GI Bill the way white men did? The middle class basically grew out of the GI Bill. Mm-hmm. Again, going back to economics, going back to, you know, money and skills. I'm sorry?
And labor unions.
Yes. So, again, you know, there's a pattern. I don't know what we do. I think because all I did was just be born black. That's all I did. I didn't set up, you know what? There wasn't even, we didn't create black. White people created black. Because they had to distinguish themselves from us. It was important to do that. So if there's a point where people say, well, we don't need to be in power. We don't need to control everything. We don't need to control the paradigm. Well, then maybe things will be better. But until that time, we got to push this history. If they're not teaching it in the schools, we got too many freaking churches in here.
Yes, sir.
You can throw a rock in this state and hit a church. We should be doing freedom schools.
Yes, that's right.
We should be bringing kids there. You all got vans. You got all this stuff. Go get the kids. Bring them to your place and start. And I'm talking about all of them. Black, white, Latino, Asian, all of them. They need to know our history. And so then once they know our history, they'll say, what are we doing? We can be great. We can be great if we let it happen. Yes, sir.
If their parents are smart, they'll make them go get that education, so they'll live in peace.
Yes, I agree. I agree. But again, we also have to, but it's kind of hard when people are against, and name it, just don't do the initials. But when you tell me you're against diversity, when you live in the most diverse country in the world, equity, when you claim it's a meritocracy, right? But yet we know that some of us can have, BA, MA, PhD, and everything else, and still don't get the job. I've worked for too many mediocre people, especially in higher ed, that have PhDs. So it's not about merit. It's about who you know, what you look like. And so we still do that. And so we shouldn't have to tell our kids they have to work twice as much just to be considered. We shouldn't have to do that. If you go to Harvard, they don't make black exams for you at Harvard or at Guilford College or at Carolina. They don't. So if I get my degree from Carolina, it's just as good as anybody else that got it. But we don't think that way. We don't think that way. I mean, you think about what, for example, the Defense Department. Just look at the resume of the current person next to the guy that he replaced. But you want to talk to me about meritocracy. So there is a point that we need to change up. And that we need to change. A lot of it is I think it's a spiritual change that this country needs. I don't see how you can know this history and not say we got to do better. I don't understand it. Whether you look at the history of us, Native Americans, Latin Americans, let's say even the Chinese Americans, who again helped build the railroads, right? And then we sent them home. Or Japanese that we locked up because of the way they looked. So if we go to war with Nigeria, do I need to be worried? Yeah. So we can be great. We can be great. It's just, do we want to be?
Thank you so much. That was deep. Mr. Shields and Dr. Michelle Laws will sing us home with some great numbers one more time.